So my fork that I've so beautifully created, it's an elegant, graceful, nice gradient on the fork. That's about as far as I'm willing to go with it. It's not that good. But I've made my fork, positioned it where I want it to start, give it a name of fork. Okay, so now if I want this fork to animate across the screen, I now need to work my code. So I'm going to save this before I do anything else. And now to animate this, what I can do is I can say fork.addEventListener. Now it's very common if you type it in, if it doesn't turn blue, that generally tells you that you've misspelled something or didn't capitalize something. So if I don't capitalize the L in listener, notice how it's black. Blue words are reserved words. They're the coding words. Anything in black are things you get to name or are actual values of things. So fork add event listener, and we're going to do event.enter frame. And then this, we'll just call this fork loop. Now what happens is an enter frame listener is telling Flash to listen to every time this fork enters its frame. Now it's a movie clip. Movie clips enter frames 1 frame per second, so 24 times per second. It's going to fire off and call this fork loop function. So your main timeline, if you look at that, currently it's 1 frame long. If I go to green here, so every time the playback head goes to a new frame, that's triggering an event or the enter frame loop. So this movie clip of this fork as it's going across, I want every time it enters a frame, I want it to move. So I now can say function fork loop E colon, and now this time I don't put mouse event, I put event. So I always put after the E, and we'll get to what E is at a future session. I'll save it. It's not that important tonight. But that E, I could type E, EVT, the whole word event. I could put Fred, Sam. It doesn't matter what it is. It's whatever I want it to be named. Again, this won't return a value, so I do a void. Curly brace, hit return. It automatically puts in my closing curly brace. That is the CS5 feature. If you type in CS4, it does not auto close your function, so it doesn't give you the closing curly brace. So if you code in CS4, it does not give you nearly as much assistance. So it's important for you to keep that in mind for those of you working in older versions at home. The code itself, nothing we do with the code is CS5 specific. So if you are working in an older version, it will work just fine. So now what I can do is I can say fork dot x equals fork dot x plus, and we'll just go 2. Now what that does is that is telling Flash I want fork's x to be equal to the current x of fork plus 2. Remembering that we start counting at the left-hand side of the screen at 0 and work our way across to higher and higher numbers. So this is going to make it move to the right as this runs. So if I test it, we'll see that the fork is slowly crawling its way across the screen. And it will go forever. That's what the fork does. So again, looking at that code, fork x is equal to fork x, and I'll put a few extra returns so it gets higher on screen for people to see. Fork x is equal to fork x plus 2. So I say my new position, I want equal to my current position plus 2. Now there is a shorthand way to write it that says exactly the same thing. Fork x plus equals 2. Those two lines are equivalent statements. One is longer to type, one is shorter to type. If you want to type fork x is equal to fork x plus 2, go bananas. If If you want to type fork x plus equals 2, I encourage you to do so. Now, if we wanted to subtract instead of add 2 pixels to our, and that 2 represents 2 pixels. In case you're wondering, the unit of measure in Flash is a pixel. And the smallest unit of measure that Flash supports then on screen visually is a twixel, a 20th of a pixel. That is the official name, a twixel. I kid you not.
Sounds like a candy.
So now, every frame, how many pixels am I going to move with this code as it is on screen? How many pixels will my fork move every frame loop?
2 pixels.
Is it 2?
What would that go 4?
I'm going to go 4 because I have 2 lines of code doing the same thing. So line 28 moves it 2. Line 29 moves it 2. So every frame I actually am moving now 4. So we should see the fork go twice as fast this time. So these two are equivalent statements. I will always use this one because it's less to type. If I wanted to subtract 2 minus equals my number, so I put whatever number I want. If I wanted to multiply, so it's multiplied by a specific value, it can go times equals. And I can do a divide equals, so I can do all of my arithmetic operations. So now every frame my fork is moving 2. There we go. But currently, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit because it's a little painful to watch that go that slowly. So we'll go, we can see the fork flies across, and the fork's still going. And the fork's still going, and the fork's still going. So if we start it over, oh, I missed. Let me try again. So you see the fork goes beyond the confines of the movie. So it goes and it goes, and because we've never told it to stop. So the final topic that I want to touch on tonight is to add in a conditional statement. I want to say if an event has occurred, I want it to do something. So we're going to say put in an if statement. So if something, then do something else. So we're going to create a conditional. We're not going to do a complex one. We're not going to get into all of the detailed ways of combining things together and doing ifs and else ifs and all kinds of other things. Just a real basic conditional to wrap up the evening because I don't want my fork to disappear forever. When it gets to the end of the screen, I want it to go back to the beginning to make my life a little bit easier. So once I move the fork, then what I can say is if fork x is greater than or equal to. Now, how big's my stage?
550.
Or do I actually care? Is there a relative way I can ask Flash how big it is? I just want to know when it's not on the stage anymore. Do you think the stage has properties? Stage is just like an object. So the property is, we say stage. Now objects have a width, but stage is special. So stage.stage W. And now we can see right there it's code hinting. When it highlights the term you want in blue, if you hit the return key on the keyboard, it automatically populates with that. So if we can say if the x of my object is greater than or equal to, that's what the caret is, the greater than sign or equal to stage.stage width, Then we put a curly brace and we put inside, and Flash Auto does the indentation. Auto closed my curly brace, making my life so much nicer, because it always used to be you'd hit return twice, put in your closing curly brace up arrow once in CS4 and older, so you had to always manually do your closing curly braces. But in CS5, it automatically does it for you, so it makes your life so much easier. So I find that my coding in Flash is, I type about 40% fewer characters in CS5 than I did in CS4 because of the code hinting. So, and part of it is knowing, what things to start typing to kick the code hinting in so it gives you the right thing. But once you get the hang of it, my code hinting died on me a little while back, right before my whole computer went belly up and had to be re-imaged. And the code hinting was the first sign that it was going bad, and then it just went implode. But when the code hinting died and I was right in the throes of trying to get some serious coding done, it made me almost want to cry because I didn't want to have to type all of that stuff that the code hinting was doing so beautifully. So I was really unhappy that day. So now, this is, inside the curly braces, we now say what we want to have happen. So this says, if the X of my fork is off screen, I want to send it back to the beginning. So I can just say fork.x equals what? Or in this case, if we send it back to 0, we'll see how that works. I'm going to modify that 0 shortly, but let's run it and find out. So the fork flies across the screen, runs off screen, and boom, but notice how it appeared on screen at the beginning. It didn't start off screen and slowly work its way in. So I don't want it to appear at 0. I want to appear at something before 0. So because currently when the fork reappears, it reappears right here. This is the fork at 0. Well, almost. Let me set it to 0. So the fork reappeared here. I don't want it to appear there. I want it to appear here. So I could hard code in that number, or I could care less how wide, what the exact number is of the width of my object. Because I could just say, set its x equal to fork.width which is essentially saying 0 minus the fork.width. 0 minus the width of the fork is just simply the negative fork width, right? Now, how many of you hated math growing up? I'm sorry. I am. Math is a beautiful thing. Math is how we understand our universe. But, that aside, remembering and understanding some of our basic mathematical functions, order of operations, using parentheses for doing complex calculations, and just simple arithmetic of, when we times a number by -1, it negates it. If that number was negative, it now becomes positive, and simple things like that that we will be using for doing some basic animation principles. We'll be looking at the coming weeks. We're not going to ask you to do complex things using sine and cosine and tangent and arctangent and calculate radians and other scary math things. We're not going to, well, we could do that complex trigonometry if you want to build some really cool kind of physics-based style games, but we probably won't. But we might want to calculate angular trajectory, and all we have to do is know that someone already wrote the formula for us. Angular trajectory means that if I point something, I can, say, fire a projectile or animate the firing of a projectile at an angle. I can adjust that projectile by gravity, so it can actually arc and do all kinds of things. Oh, wait, Angry Birds and silly games like that. There you go. The good part is all those formulas are online. So if I don't use them for a while and forget the specifics of it and can't find the code example I've used with students in the past, I just go hop online and go type in, S3, games physics formulas or, things like that, and there it is. Good to go. Anytime you are looking for code examples in Flash of how to do something using coding, always start your search with the letters AS3. So always start out AS3. ActionScript has 3 versions, 1, 2, and 3. We are using 3. I had a student, we were just going nuts trying to figure out why his project wasn't working, and suddenly I looked through and it's like, what is going on? Oh, it was all AS2. Well, actually not all, but like half of it, because he found some example online. And AS2 and AS3 aren't compatible. And I had another student who did it all in AS3 but told his Flash to publish in AS2 because he thought that's what it was supposed to do. So the code was 100% correct, but because he told Flash to compile it as AS2, you can't compile AS3 as AS2, so it failed. And it was unhappy, and we're like, what is going on? Finally thought, I better check this. And sure enough, he did. So 0 minus something is just going to be that negative number. Minus 2 if you want. So now that we have this, I can test it once more. The fork will fly across the screen. Once it's completely off screen, it starts back off screen and repeats its endless loop. And if I click on the plates, we will see that the cake moves between them. And all is good except for the fact that I can't actually eat this chocolate cake, though it's making me very hungry.